Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit givemysterious.fm. You're listening to episode 404 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about the Banta Inn and the ghosts who live there. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to stick around for the end of the episode. We'll have your feedback on our recent episode 393 on the Sword of St. Michael and more weird questions. But first, in 1879, the Banta Inn was opened in what's now Tracy, California. For almost 150 years, people have gone there to eat, drink, and have a good time. But in 1968, owner Tony Kukan died in the bar, and subsequently, numerous patrons and employees began reporting ghostly phenomena. So what's more, some of the phenomena have been caught on video. So who was Tony Kukan? What have people reported? And how credible is this case? That's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So Jimmy, how will today's episode work?
Well, we're going to be talking with Lloyd Auerbach, who is one of the key investigators of the Banta Inn. Most of today's episode will be an interview that I recently did with him, and the interview will cover almost everything you need to know. However, before we start the interview, I want to call attention to one of the things that we didn't mention in it. In 1991, Lloyd brought a Japanese psychic named Aiko Gibo and an American psychic named Kathy Reardon to the inn to see what they could pick up. With them was a Japanese film crew that was recording Mrs. Gibo's visit to the United States. While they were at the inn, Mrs. Gibo was speaking to the camera in Japanese when a loud noise startled everyone. In a paranormal casebook, Lloyd describes the incident this way.
During this conversation, a mug with a handle, the kind that won't roll, struck the metal base of a table in the bar area and made a loud noise that attracted our attention. Picking up the mug, we found it to be ice cold, yet there was piping hot coffee still in the mug and none spilled on the floor.
And because the film crew was there, this incident was caught on camera, so you can see Mrs. Gibo when the noise happens. They also show footage of the table where this happened and the mug in question. We'll play that for you in the video version of the podcast, but even if you're listening to the audio version, you can still hear the impact.
できるだけの人をここへ呼び込もうと、そして楽しく遊んでってもらおうといういい方の動きの自爆霊、霊というのは決して悪いものではないというのはいつも私が言っていることですけれど。
トニーがそうだって返事してるわ。
音の原因はコーヒーマグだった。義母さんがトニーの霊を感じたまさにその席の下にどこからか落ちてきたのである。それまでテーブル上にカップがなかったことはその場の全員が確認している。
The fact that the mug didn't break or even spill coffee despite the impact is similar to other incidents that are reported at the inn, where it seems like drinking glasses and ashtrays were frequently making loud impacts without breaking, but you'll hear more about that in the interview.
And before we get to the interview, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Shelby R., Mary K., Audra B., Crystal J., and Anthony P. Their generous donations at givemysterious.fm make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows at StarQuest. More than 90% of our financial support comes from individual donors like you, and you can join them by visiting givemysterious.fm. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you in part by Rosary Army, featuring award-winning Catholic podcasts, rosary resources, videos, and the School of Mary online community, prayer, and learning platform. Learn how to make them, pray them, and give them away while growing in your faith at rosaryarmy.com and schoolofmary.com. And by The Grady Group, a Catholic company bringing financial clarity to their clients across the United States, using safe money options to produce reasonable rates of return for their clients. Learn more at GradyGroupInc.com.
Lloyd Auerbach has a Master's of Science degree in parapsychology. He is the director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, the president of the Forever Family Foundation, and the president of the Rhine Board of Directors. He has been working in parapsychology for over 40 years, focusing on education and field investigation. He is the author or co-author of more than a dozen books and teaches parapsychology courses online at the Rhine Education Center. In addition, he is a professional mentalist and psychic entertainer under the name Professor Paranormal, and he is a professional chocolatier. Lloyd Auerbach, welcome back to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Yeah, good to see you.
So today we're talking about the Banta Inn, and I thought it would be good to just start with an overview of the Banta Inn. How did it begin as an institution?
Well, it was built in, it's a building outside of Tracy, California. So it's right on the edge of this city of Tracy, which is about an hour and a half east of San Francisco, little inland. It started and is, it was originally a 2-story inn and saloon. Place to eat, place for people to stop along the way when they came up and from Southern California and going down. It's kind of one of the main thoroughfares, pretty close to Highway 5, which follows an old trail in many respects. It was built in 1879 by a man named Frank Gallegos, who was reportedly a member of Joaquin Murrieta's band. Joaquin Murrieta, the kind of known as the Robin Hood of California, although his treasure is still somewhere out there.
So he was good on the taking from the rich, not quite as good on the giving to the poor.
He did some giving to the poor, but supposedly there's a treasure. I've met a couple treasure hunters who are still looking for Murrieta's treasure. So it's still out there at some point. There were rooms to let on the upper floor. Downstairs was the saloon, dining, the inn for eating, that kind of a pub kind of thing. They did have, and I should mention that the upper floor, as an inn, was both for people to stay overnight on their travels, but also there were a few rooms that were dedicated to the bordello of the area. The upstairs did have a fire in 1910, was rebuilt pretty quickly or fixed up pretty quickly. And then there was a major fire in 1937, which gutted the place. But it was rebuilt. It did stay in the family. Jenny Gallegos, the youngest daughter of Frank Gallegos, married a guy named Tony Gukin, and Jenny and Tony owned the place. In fact, Jenny owned it until through the 70s, at 1970s at that point. Tony was her third husband. So, she had been married before at the time as well. Mm-hmm.
And Tony had some unusual habits that people noticed.
So when Tony came into the picture, he very quickly became the presence when he was alive in the place. He was one of the owners. He and his wife owned the place. She was around somewhat from what I understand, but pretty much he was omnipresent. He was bartending. He was the manager of the place, oversaw the food in the restaurant, did everything at that point. And he pretty much stayed behind the bar unless something came up in the restaurant. This is all according to the regulars who knew him from the time. He did a number of odd things that when he was alive, and we'd consider them odd. As a person who was a bartender myself in college and grad school, sometimes, you're bored. And so he's behind the bar. There was a pre-electronic register there. It was an old register. Like a lot of bartenders, the register drawer would be kept open, except when you're closing or leaving behind the bar to make change really easily. And he had a habit of standing by the register, with his back to the back bar and kind of keeping his hand in the register and consciously or unconsciously, probably consciously at first and later unconsciously stacking the coins in nice, neat rows. And that would be until the next time he threw change into the coin register at that point. And this would go on constantly. The other thing is he would take a break every now and then, and he would sit in a corner at a corner table in the cocktail area, not a very large area for tables near the bar, and often sit there nursing a beer, usually a Budweiser, and often playing two-handed poker, apparently to practice the poker games that he was going to hopefully win with some of his buddies. So this would occur quite often.
So this wasn't solitaire he was playing. He was
not playing solitaire. He had apparently 5-card stud is what he was playing. What he was doing. So he's playing against himself. I guess trying to practice what he would do. I don't know how he'd bluff himself, but that'd be kind of interesting to know.
Yeah. And so, he was there in the 1960s. What ended up happening with Tony?
So in 1968, he had a massive heart attack behind the bar. Fell down. Somebody ran it was literally across the street to the fire department paramedic station. It was from what I was told, less than 2 to 3 minutes before someone got over there. They could not resuscitate him. He was gone. Big blow to the folks there, but he was getting on in years. And I did hear from a relative in the 1990s who said that he had cancer. That's unconfirmed because no one I talked to who knew Tony at the time said anything about that, but that could also have exacerbated his death.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So he passed on in 1968,
right.
And shortly thereafter, people started noticing some strange things happening in the inn.
So
when did they notice, and what did they notice? The
first thing that happened was some of the regulars, some of the people who were constantly at the bar, who spent a lot of time with Tony because they were always at the bar, started telling the other folks working there that they saw Tony after his death, both walking through the place and also sitting at that table with 2 hands of poker, occasionally with a bottle of beer in front of him. So people were not paying attention to the regulars. They just thought that they were, missing Tony or pulling their leg or something like that. But eventually, and I want to say eventually, it was not too long after that, it was probably a few weeks later, that the folks running the place started noticing, it was Jenny, I don't know if it's Jenny herself or some of the folks working for her, but they started noticing people coming through the bar area to go to the restaurant to eat and remarking, as they did when Tony was alive, about the guy sitting in the corner playing 2-handed poker. And it would be people who didn't know Tony, who had never been there before. Usually first or second time visitors would say that when Tony was alive, same thing after he died. So then people started paying attention a little bit to what was going on.
And I understand, so we've got Tony apparently, doing a life behavior, something he had often been doing when he was alive. And that could be a residual haunting. It could be an impression.
Yeah, it could have been, but people did report that he would look up at them, smile, and occasionally give them a nod as they were walking by.
And then there were other things that people began to notice happening that Tony had not really been doing when he was alive. So that would suggest this is more than a residual haunting, that it's an actual apparition.
Yeah.
Within a
few months after he died, there were movements of things, beer bottles kind of sliding across the bar if they were there, glasses as well. Sometimes beer bottles falling off the bar, but not breaking. So this is an interesting thing. Things would fall on the floor. Bottles would fall on the floor, but never crack or break. So that was pretty interesting. Then the bartenders started noticing that after opening, because the new bartenders were slamming the register door closed and opening up when they had a sale. And they noticed something very odd, and that was the change which was kind of spread out in each of the compartments, would suddenly be in nice, neat rows, nice, neat stacks for that. And then there were over time, over the next few years, you had the service bell in the kitchen ringing when no one was in there. You had candles lighting and actually going out without, it's one thing for them to go out if there's a breeze. It's another thing for a candle to just at the table in one of those little jars to pop up and light on its own. There would be silverware moving. There would be pots and pans rattling and occasionally moving across the kitchen. Never hurting anybody, and nothing ever broke, which would make sense if you're talking about somebody who was so careful about running the place.
Now, in 1981, the inn got new owners. Who were they?
It was Joan and Dave Borland. Joan, they've gotten divorced since then, well after I was involved with this place. Joan had grown up in the area. She knew Tony. In fact, she told me she often called him Uncle Tony as she was growing up. So she had a connection. And she heard about the ghost, that Tony was still there. And that was one of the main determining factors for buying this place as opposed to some other place. Dave was an Alameda County Sheriff's deputy. So he was there sometimes and obviously was working. Alameda County was closer, it's the Oakland area, kind of generally that area. So, about 45 minutes to an hour away for his commute as well. Joan had no problem with the ghost, with Tony being there. In fact, she hoped she would encounter him. Dave didn't believe in ghosts, so it wasn't a big deal for him.
Okay. How did you become involved in the case? Because I know you've done investigations there.
So, basically, of course, in the 1980s, I was on faculty at John F. Kennedy University. And we were getting cases, and we would occasionally, because of publicity from Ghostbusters in 1984, we would be inundated, especially around Halloween, by the local news stations, by national programs, asking us if they could shoot us, doing an investigation, do something. So I was always on the lookout for public places that might be interesting to potentially take media to, but also just for me to bring students to, or graduate students, I should say, for teaching purposes. And in the mid-'80s, I got to know a young guy named Christopher Chacon, who was a magician. He actually had worked for David Copperfield for a while, and he was really interested in psychic phenomena and doing investigations. And eventually, the two of us, as the parapsychology program at JFK ended, we created the Office of Paranormal Investigations because we needed to fill a void. People needed to be able to call someplace, since the university, we didn't have an office anymore at the university. I didn't, nobody on the faculty did. Even though I was still on faculty and still teaching a few courses, there was no office for people to call, and made it easier for us. Somewhere along the line in 1980, late 89, Chris heard from one of his relatives, when they found out that he was interested in this area and doing investigations, that they had a distant cousin who owned a place out in Tracy. And it turned out that Chris was distantly related to Joan. And so Chris went out there on his own first, got a lot of the basic information. Nothing happened when he went out there the first time. I got on the phone with Joan and talked to her, was going to go out, set up a time, and coincidentally, Hard Copy called and wanted to do a segment on on a haunted place.
Now, Hard Copy was a TV show at the time. It
was a TV news magazine show. They did all sorts of segments that we don't see those kinds of shows anymore, that have kind of a wide range of things in the same episode, typically.
And that was in 1990.
Yeah, that was in 1990. So it was a couple of months after the first time I talked to Joan, after Chris went out there.
Okay. Did you see anything? What were some of the early things that you witnessed while you were there?
Well, when I got there, and just know that didn't go at night. Unlike the ghost hunting shows, there was, first of all, no reason to, since most of the activity was being reported during the daytime by just about everybody, although there was some activity at night. So I got there early before Hard Copy did. I spent some time talking to Joan and the bartender a bit. I didn't see or experience anything at that time. But before they opened, so we're still there in the morning. So it was late morning. They opened at noon. And I'm being interviewed just on the basics. And then we're going to do a little bit of talking to the witnesses, and then they'll interview me again. And I'm being interviewed sitting on a stool facing the bar, a few feet from the bar. And the director and the cameraman have their backs to the bar and are talking to me. At the other end of the bar, there was Joan and the bartender and a couple other people. And I just a couple of the regulars were down who had gotten there a little early because they heard this TV shoot was happening. So as I'm talking, a glass ashtray on the bar behind the director and cameraman pops up into the air. I can visibly see it. I hear a sound. I see this thing coming up above the heads of the cameraman and director, and then going down very quickly and slapping down on the bar very hard. Didn't break. Again, nothing seemed to break when things flew. And of course, Joan and the bartender start laughing. I started laughing a little bit. I think the regulars were probably laughing too. The director says, "What was that?" And all they got on camera, of course, was the sound of the glass ashtray hitting the bar. And the director, kind of tongue-in-cheek, although with a pretty straight face, said, "Hey, can you get him to do it again?" after we told him what happened. So they did, although, the weird thing about a lot of these shows is they did shoot us messing up the coins, closing the drawer, waiting a couple of minutes, and opening it up, and there are the coins in order. They shot that, but they almost never used the full effect because they didn't want to wait 2 minutes. You don't have 2 minutes of a camera just simply staring at a cash register.
Oh, so they actually got footage of the coin effect.
Yeah, a lot of the shows did. Yeah.
The coins were messed up. You close the drawer. 2 minutes later, you open it, and they're in rows.
That happened constantly, but it was almost, I'm trying to remember if there was a show that might have shown it, what they looked like afterwards, and showed us slamming the drawer closed, but they never showed the process. So the director would usually say, unless we show the entire process, people are going to think we faked it, that kind of thing. And that's pretty common to hear from TV folks. It's one reason why you don't you don't typically see interviews with the crew of these TV shows who actually witness stuff, but because they're the crew or the director, they don't want to go on camera themselves.
Okay. I understand there was another early incident that I believe you saw that involved a glass of orange juice. Do you remember that?
Yeah. So it was actually relatively right after, within a few minutes after the ashtray incident. We're talking and the camera's not rolling. And there was a glass of orange juice on the bar that Joan had put out for me because I'd asked for something to drink. And it slid across the bar, most of the bar. It wasn't like a wet thing where it kind of moved a little bit. It slid through most of the bar. And that happened again later that afternoon when we're sitting just talking again. Camera's not rolling, camera's not on it, but Tony's way of teasing a little bit.
Okay. Now, one of the things you stress in your courses is that even when you investigate a case and even when there is something paranormal going on, a lot of the times there will also be elements that have normal explanations,
right?
Because as soon as people have the idea there's a ghost in my house, then every little bump of the night is, oh, there's that ghost again. And I understand that there was an incident here that seemed really impressive when it happened, but then it turned out to have a cause that was not inside the bar, which could suggest maybe Tony wasn't responsible for this one. What happened here?
So starting with hard copy, then we did many TV shows, also did many visits. In fact, there was one point where we were doing some sit-down interviews, just talking to whoever we could on a Saturday night. So a busy Saturday night. Joan said a lot of people in the area come on Saturday night, so it was a good time for us to see who else might have had experiences. Joan did ask me for a little quid pro quo, in that she knew I was a magician. At the time, I was still doing regular magic, some mentalism, but some regular magic as well. And she asked me to put on a little show from behind the bar for the customers. So it was actually really packed. People who had been finishing dinner, people came when they heard what time I was going to be doing this. And so I'm behind the bar doing some magic tricks. And it was closer to 9:00 at night. And at one point, people can ask me questions about the ghost thing too. So we're doing that. And this one guy, who was a regular, actually, as I recall, very tall guy, said, "Okay, I know I've had my experiences, but can you get him to do something for all of us right now?" So I said, "What the hell? Tony, give us a sign." Of course, I looked up in the air because that's what you do, right? The lights go out. In fact, the power went out just as soon as I finished that statement. And there was silence in the room. I didn't know what to think. Nobody else knew what to think. And there's silence for a couple of minutes, like nobody's speaking at all. And all of a sudden, then somebody noticed looking out the window that the entire street was blacked out. And then somebody comes running over from the fire station, comes in and says, don't worry, folks. Somebody hit a power line, had a power pole rather, with their car a few minutes ago. Eventually they had to turn the power off to fix the connections. So it'll be back on. It came back on in less than a half an hour. So it wasn't Tony, unless you want to think that Tony caused the car accident, which I would never think. So it had a normal explanation. It's just that, as they say, timing is everything.
And that would be really impressive. I mean, my first thought would be if you say, give us a sign, and wham, the lights go out. My first thought would be, wow, Tony really gave us a sign. But in this case, unless he's outside the bar causing car crashes elsewhere,
right.
This turned out to just have a normal explanation.
Well, and actually, I'm glad it did, because what could have happened if it was just the bar, for example, it could pretty easily have been somebody in the group, in the audience there, the regulars, who turned the power off. Saw an opportunity to turn the power off at that point. And then we would all have been wondering, or people would have been very mad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad it was. I mean, not that I was happy about a car accident, but I'm glad it had a normal explanation. They would have accused me of faking it, basically.
Yeah. Now, I understand that you once asked a physicist who had seen some phenomena what he thought about all this. What did he have to say?
So one of the times I was visiting over there, actually it was when we were there with sightings, is when this happened. So we were there before lunch, during lunch, after lunch, and we were just asking if people at lunchtime had ever had an experience there, because there were a lot of people who would come for food, lunch, and dinner.
Sightings was another TV show.
Sightings was a great TV show in the 1990s, which was a news magazine show, but it was a magazine show, so 3 segments typically, kind of like Unsolved Mysteries, but all focused on the paranormal. And I did a lot of work with them. And one of the early ones we did was this place, the Banta Inn. So this one guy raises his hand, and says, yeah, I've had some experiences here. And it turned out he was a physicist from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, which is our nuclear research facility, which is about 20 minutes or a half an hour away. And first thing he said is, he and several other folks, when they discovered the place, the food is great. It's great food. It's a great setting. It was, very rustic, a really good place to get away from the lab for a time. So they would come there for lunch quite a bit. And he had seen glassware moving. He had seen things flying across the, the room. And 2 things he specifically noted when he was there with his son. One was a glass leaving the bar and literally flying across the room and hitting the wall, dropping to the floor without breaking. The other was actually his son called him over, witnessing something that was reported very frequently by people at the place, which was they had a jukebox with CDs in it, and you'd flip the CDs using a control to find the right artist you wanted, then pick the actual song. The CDs were flipping by themselves. And that was something that mechanically this jukebox could not do, because it was a physical thing you had to move with your hand. But this is what the kid witnessed and what the physicist also witnessed. And he then said to me that they would come, because the food was so good, they would not only come for lunch, but come for the show. And they would see a lot of different things. And I asked him, what do you think about this? He says, I think I have to rethink physics.
Quite a testimonial.
Yeah.
And more open than some folks working in that field.
Yeah, it was great that he's in the sighting segment, which is up on my YouTube channel. Unfortunately, I don't think that statement made the show. I tried to get them to include that, but I said for whatever reason, they didn't want to include that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that the husband of the current owner, or the current co-owner, Dave Borland, was a policeman who did not believe in ghostly phenomena.
Right.
And so, of course, he didn't initially believe any of these reports about what was happening in the Banta Inn, but a couple of events began to make an impression on him. What was the first of those?
Well, before I say that, they're not the current owners. So they were the owners through the 90s, and they did sell the place in the late 1990s.
That's what I meant. The owners at the time.
At the time, yeah. So first thing, the bartender, Linda, had a few experiences, and she reported she was relatively new to the area. She had just moved a few months before into the area to Tracy. She had been born there, but didn't grow up in the area. She didn't know what to make of this ghost stuff, but she did see, this is well after Tony's death, she did start seeing the guy sitting in the corner and seeing him moving through the restaurant. And she also got a sense of presence once in a while. And then a couple of things happened, one of which was getting a couple of drunken guys out of the bar who were likely to turn around and come back in. This is at night. And as the door closed behind her, she hears some clicks, hears the doorknob turning, and she looks out, and one of the guys is trying to get back in, but the door's locked. The thing is that you needed a key to lock the door. It was not a simple way of locking it. They didn't want the patrons locking people out.
Once in a while, the door will lock by itself, the front door. And usually if there's some sort of little incident or something, it's like Tony the ghost will look after whoever's here. So therefore, we didn't have to deal with them anymore.
Thereby separating the people who are fighting.
Right.
Yeah.
So there were a number of things that happened like that. So Dave, after hearing all this, Dave decided that he was going to test her. So he got a hold of some people who knew Tony, got a picture of Tony and Tony's wife, Tony and his wife, Tony in a group, a couple single photos of Tony. There were some groups that included friends of Tony, and so on.
Hadn't Linda also seen Tony's reflection in a mirror at some point? So she had a visual impression of him?
That actually reminded me. Yeah, it was actually right before Dave put this together. She very clearly, she was after hours. She was cleaning some glassware behind the bar. She looked up at the mirror because she was facing the back bar in the mirror, and she saw this guy and standing next to her, this older guy, doing this. Kind of waving at her. Yeah, waving at her with a big smile on his face. And she turned away and looked over there, and there's nobody there. And she looked back, and he's doing the same thing again, and then he disappeared. So with all of that, Dave gets these photos together, shows them to Linda, says, "Who did you see?" Linda took a few seconds, because she had seen very clearly in the mirror and at the table who this guy was, very quickly picked out Tony Gukin. So that's the first thing from a law enforcement perspective. This is, granted, it's eyewitness testimony, but, it's like a lineup. It's like a mug book.
Yeah.
We've all seen on TV, right? Dave actually put that together. And then over time, I should mention that before the next thing happened a week later, which is on a weekend, he showed some people who were coming into the restaurant, we see this guy sitting in the corner, we see this guy. He would show them the pictures, and they could pick out Tony right away. And those are people who had never been to the area or never been to the restaurant.
So what was it that finally convinced Dave?
Dave, Joan told me this story. This was on a Saturday, and it was early. It was before opening, and Dave had come in to help just clean up, because the night before was a pretty busy Friday night, and the kitchen staff had not come in yet, and to finish cleaning up. So Dave is actually finishing washing some dishes and silverware. There's two sinks, there's a wash sink and a rinse sink, and as he's working, he's doing stuff in the wash sink, and some silverware that was already in the rinse sink, just sitting there. And as he said, that a spoon floated up towards the top of the water level, floated up beyond the water level, hovered right in front of his face, and then shot off across the room, the kitchen. The phrase that she said is, he said it was like a little UFO. So a utensil flying object, I guess. So at that point, Joan was behind the bar, just cleaning up, getting the bar set up for the bartender to come in. She saw Dave come out of the kitchen. He was shuffling. He was not like walking in normal pace. He had his head down. He comes up to her. He lifts up his head. He looks at her and he says, "Okay, I believe you now." And then turns around and walks back into the kitchen. And this all happened, I was certainly not there, but I did talk to Dave about it, and he said it was the weirdest thing in the world. He said, I don't know what to make of that. But I kind of have to accept this stuff now.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that the son of the physicist had seen the CDs flipping in the jukebox, which shouldn't have been possible without someone manning the control. And I know you also had an experience with the jukebox, which we'll talk about in a minute, but did the jukebox display any other unusual behavior that other people saw?
Yeah.
Or heard?
Yeah. When they put in the jukebox, CDs were not really a thing in the 70s, certainly. They came in the 80s, and jukeboxes switched from vinyl to CDs. So they put in the CD jukebox, and in putting the music in the jukebox, some of the regulars insisted that because Tony was a big fan of Patsy Cline, and the original jukebox had Patsy Cline albums in it, they should have CDs for Patsy Cline.
Yeah, who doesn't like walking after midnight?
Right.
I go out walking after midnight, out in the moonlight, just like we used to do. I'm always walking after midnight, searching for you.
So what was reported to us was people would play a song, and very often it would start playing, and then it would stop playing before finishing, and it would switch to a Patsy Cline song on its own. So that was not uncommon, and I guess I never found out specifically it was certain songs that would play that would switch over. My guess is Tony's tastes were not the same as some of the patrons in general.
So he'd get tired of listening to whatever they'd picked and say, I've had enough of this. Let's hear Patsy Cline.
Yeah. I don't recall there being ever being any real heavy metal in there. So that could have really been a problem. Yeah.
Now, a lot of this activity that we've described, there's some apparitional activity like when Linda saw Tony in the mirror and so forth. But most of what we're hearing about is stuff moving, and that would be classified as poltergeist activity. So would you say, or would we say that Tony was a poltergeist, or would we describe him some other way?
Well, first, Tony was also, remember, seen at the table quite a bit and reacting to people. So that's part of the apparitional stuff. We would not classify this at all as a poltergeist case. Poltergeist cases are purely physical activity. There's no apparitional activity typically. That's the way we define it here in the U.S. Now, in the UK, they still use that term as an overall term for any case that has some physical activity or all physical activity. And then they split it out once they've done some work finding out what else is going on there, that they'll split it out into an apparitional case or a living agent potential case for things. So the way we define it in the U.S., when we use the term poltergeist, we're referring to what's called or abbreviated as RSPK, or recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. It is movement or effect of objects, physical things that happen because of the unconscious of a living person in the location. And while there are poltergeist cases that happen at workplaces, in fact, we had a bartender case in Vallejo in the earlier mid-'80s. She was a poltergeist agent. No apparitions, no ghosts, but stuff was happening all over the place. Breaking, screwing up, chaotic. Poltergeist cases are very chaotic, not careful like this case. Apparition cases where there's activity, if a living person can move an object, so why can't a dead person for that matter? Much more careful. So we would never have called Tony that name, poltergeist.
Right. We would say here in America, we'd say this was an apparition with some poltergeist activity.
No, we would say this is apparition using psychokinesis. We would never use the word poltergeist in this case at all.
But for our friends over the pond, they would still say this is a poltergeist case with an apparition.
They might say that, yeah.
Okay. Now, when people perceive something strange, whether it's an apparition or a poltergeist, they're often scared. They're afraid that like there's an angry ghost and he might harm me in some way. Do you see signs of Tony being angry, or was he displaying some other kind of mood in this activity?
I think playful intolerance is probably the best way to put it. I can think of two instances. One, interestingly enough, involves some Hell's Angels. We don't exactly know what happened, but there were a group of Hell's Angels who had been driving by, and they stopped in for drinks. They weren't being, disruptive at all. Not at all. But Joan was actually behind the bar at that time, and Tony was often very protective of women. Women would often report a male presence feeling like right outside the ladies' room, as if somebody's making sure watching over.
Guarding it.
Yeah. But this one night, the girlfriend of one of the Hell's Angels goes into the ladies' room, and within, 30 seconds, she comes running out. We don't know what happened. I mean, I can only imagine maybe she saw Tony in the mirror or something like that, but she came running out, said something to her boyfriend. Joan could not make out what it was. He looked angry. He goes into the ladies' room, comes running out of there, gathers all the guys up, everybody from there, and they all left. So we have no idea just what happened there with that. It just he may have objected to this motorcycle group gang, being there. It's possible. Again, they were not being disruptive of anything. It just maybe he didn't like their look. I don't know. But the thing that happened right in front of Joan that's most interesting is there were two guys who came in for lunch, and they had heard about the ghost and all that. And they were sitting at the bar after lunch. They had beers in front of them. They each had change of a 20 in front of them. Bills and coins, and they are talking to Joan and basically making fun of people, of kind of like the stupid people who believe in ghosts, typical. I can't even call them skeptics, the pseudo skeptics, the disbelievers, those folks. And at some point, Joan was getting a little annoyed, and at some point, a quarter in front of each of the two of them turned up on edge. Now, in the write-up I said coins were stacked. Actually, they weren't stacked. It was harder for me to describe this. So basically, think of a quarter flat on the bar, and it just simply stands on edge and balances there. And it was in front of each one of them, and they saw it. They clearly saw this happen. And Joan said, she said, all I could do was smile. She said the two of them looked at each other, and they bolted out of the place, leaving their change, better part of a 20 for each of them. Good tip that she got, sitting on the bar for them. There were other times that Joan said, people also making fun, other things happened. She didn't specifically say, but she did say that there were other things, not as subtle perhaps as that, but other skeptics were kind of kicked out of the bar. Let's put it that way.
Now, you said that that Tony's reported to have done things to protect women, like locking the door for Linda to keep people from coming back in who were drunk and stuff. Also, women reporting feeling like the ladies' room was being guarded. I understand Tony could also be a little playful with women. Can you tell us about that?
Well, what I can tell you is that when I was there for Japanese TV with Aiko Gibo, Mrs. Gibo, at one point she starts giggling because Tony was flirting with her.
Okay. So we don't get a vibe of angriness or anything from Tony. It's more playful, mischievous, that kind of thing.
Never for a single moment did anyone feel threatened, except maybe the Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
and I don't know why it'd be threatened by the coin sticking up, but I can see people who disbelieve freaking out about it and leaving, because I've seen things like that happen. But no, there had never been anything negative like that from him. He wasn't that kind of guy, apparently, when he was alive. He was the guy you really want to see welcoming you into the bar.
Okay. Now, thus far, we've been talking about Tony, but there are also reports of a second ghost in the Banta Inn. Who would that be?
There was a woman named Margaret who frequented the place when Tony and Jenny owned it, when Tony was alive.
So Margaret would have known Tony.
Would have known Tony, right. She heard reports of her being a customer as far back as the late 1940s, but sometime in the late 50s, early 60s, she also had a heart attack. Didn't die at the bar, but she did have a heart attack at the bar. And she was pretty much a regular in some respects, you could say. Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so there were, even when Tony was alive, there were people who claimed that they had seen Margaret after she died from time to time.
And what did they report her doing? Or what do we have a sense that she may be responsible for that's been reported?
Well, there was some thought. There were a few physical things, nothing like after what happened when Tony died. There are a few physical things like glasses moving and bottles moving behind the bar that we heard from the regulars happened before Tony died. And they assumed Margaret was doing it. But Margaret, the thing about this that makes it difficult is that Margaret, we don't have a sense, we didn't get a sense of her behavior other than being a customer. Whereas with Tony, it was all about the bottles, the glassware, the beer, the coins. It's stuff connected to him in many respects. But there were times that people, including psychics that I worked with, who had sensed both Margaret and Tony being around.
That's what I was going to turn to next, because in investigations, you sometimes will bring in psychics to see what they can pick up on in an environment. I understand one of the psychics you brought in was a woman named Kathy Reardon, and you had an experience with the jukebox that was quite striking. What happened there?
Yeah, and it was not just me who had this experience. It was like everybody with us. That same night that I talked about earlier, where the power went off, we were there late at night. In fact, we stayed an hour or two. We stayed for a couple hours after closing, but it was only about an hour after closing. Joan and the bartender were sticking around with us. Joan had allowed us, and the lights are all on. We're not turning the lights out. In fact, the lights were significantly brighter while we were there after closing than they were when they were open, because the lights are typically dimmed, of course, when a restaurant's open. And
and just to touch base on that, because people may wonder about it. You've mentioned being there at night, but you initially said you didn't go at night. I imagine that one of the reasons you were there at night was because there are more people there. You can talk to more witnesses.
Well, that's exactly right. This was this Saturday night when Joan put the word out that we were going to be there. We knew that there were going to be people there anyway, because Saturday night was a busy night for them. So we got there before it got dark, and we started talking to people, but we were talking to people throughout the evening. And then we stayed afterwards as things got quiet to sit and put it all together. Really, it was not to try to, we did have an EMF meter, but nothing like that was going on. And I didn't know that I didn't really think Tony was going to perform for us or do anything for us specifically because we're hanging around. So we're there after hours. Kathy was in the bar area with Joan and the bartender. I'm trying to remember how many people I had. 3 other people with me, former students of mine from JFK University, all part of the Office of Paranormal Investigations. We had all interviewed people separately, so we're starting to put the notes together. And at one point, I vaguely hear music, didn't quite figure out what it was, from the front, from the bar area. But Kathy comes running back. Come on, come quick. You got to check this out. So it's like, okay. We all get up, we go into the bar area, and the jukebox is playing. And the jukebox is playing Spirits in the Material World by the Police, which, by the way, is not a song about ghosts at all, if you listen to the lyrics. But that's the title, right? We are spirits in the material world. Our spirits in the material world. Our spirits in the material world. And I think I turned to Kathy and said, yeah, very, very funny to Kathy. She said, no, go look at the jukebox. So I did. And I'm looking at the front and I look back at Kathy. She said, no, keep looking at it. So I look down behind the jukebox and I reach down and I come up holding the cord. It is playing the song. It is not plugged in. There is no power backup in this jukebox. I already knew that. And it finishes the song and turns itself off. The reason it was unplugged is because the bartender unplugged it every night as part of her closing process. So Tony was giving us a kind of final, here you go for the evening.
Another psychic that was brought in to see what she perceived in the inn is a Japanese psychic named Aiko Gibo. What happened with her?
So again, this is this was for a segment on Japanese television, Tokyo Broadcasting. That this was, I think, the second show I worked with them on. We'd already done some laboratory study with Mrs. Gibo, and now we're bringing her out an investigation because they always like to do that. All she knew about the Banta Inn was that there was a male ghost. That's all she knew. And she only knew that because that's all the crew knew, with the exception of the TV coordinator who I was working with, who I was sure was not giving them any more details at the place.
Okay, so she's largely blind to the reported phenomena.
Right. So, we get in there and at first she noticed Margaret. She was kind of welcomed by Margaret, but then that quickly Margaret left or moved away, and then Tony is there. And she describes him, and I sent her to the back, to the restaurant area, because on the wall now, I think they're still there. I'm not 100% sure because it's been a few years, but there were pictures, some of the pictures that Dave Borland had put together to see if people recognized Tony from seeing him as a ghost. And she looked him over and went right there. That's him right there. And it was Tony Guggen. So then we start having some conversations as we're talking at one point in the bar area. And she had many conversations with Tony throughout that entire afternoon, morning and afternoon. And including when she was giggling and saying that Tony was flirting with her. And then,
do I also recall that she saw him doing the two-handed poker before she had heard anyone discuss that?
She did. She did describe that. That's what as Margaret was moving away or kind of leaving, because she was focused on Margaret, she saw this guy over in the corner. And apparently that's when, she went over to him, started talking to him, and then he stood up apparently and started communicating with her that way. Yeah. So
go ahead.
I was going to say we're talking, and one of the two chandeliers that are in the bar area, both were actually actual covered wagon wheels that were converted into electrical devices, chandeliers. One of them, out of the corner of my eye, I see it swinging, and there was nobody over by there. And the only way you could have gotten it to swing in any event would have been to stand on a chair. Or to get a stick of some kind and to start it swinging. And there was just not an opportunity for anybody to do that. With me, Kathy Reardon was with us as well. Chris Chacon was with us as well. And a couple of other folks. We had a large group from the Japanese contingent was there too. And Mrs. Gibo actually said that Tony was standing there, but so was Margaret, apparently. And, to this day, I suspect it was Tony, but Mrs. Gibo said she didn't know who had moved it. She thought it might have been Margaret. Now, in her belief system, the Shinto belief, they often give offerings of food and drink to their ancestor spirits who kind of watch over them. And so she wanted to bring some booze out, and she thought a glass of wine would work. Kathy immediately said, make it red, which made more sense for the camera anyway. And as the glass is being brought under the wagon wheel chandelier, which is swinging, it stopped as if somebody put their hand up and it just stopped or grabbed it to stop it. Loss of momentum, loss of inertia. I would have loved to have Tom, the physicist, there to witness that. because he really would have had to rethink physics at that point.
And one of the nice things about this was because there was a camera crew there, they happened to get some of this footage. So we'll have in the video version of the podcast, we'll have some imagery that was taken from that incident. Unfortunately, they don't have the cold stop in what they aired, but we can at least show you the basic phenomenon of how much it was swinging and so forth.
Yeah, and they definitely shot that, but in the editing, this was part of a 2-hour special. And I guess they didn't think it important enough. This is the problem with editing, leaving things out, and editing and leaving things in that you see with television.
Incidentally, people may not be aware, but the idea of like leaving, offerings of food and drink and so forth for ancestors is not unique to Shinto. It actually is also something that appears in ancient Israelite religion, for example.
Yeah, actually, it's not an uncommon thing to leave food and offering for spirit and normal, food and drink. Not uncommon even culturally in a lot of parts of the world as well. It's also a way, whether it's for ancestor spirits or in some cultures, it's to fend off evil spirits. You're giving them an offering so that they don't bother you.
Yeah. Now, another phenomenon was also caught on camera when a TV show called Beyond Bizarre was filming. And we'll also, in the video version of the podcast, we'll have footage of that event. What happened in that case?
Well, I was there for this shoot. I was there with Kerry Gaynor, who is a parapsychologist, hypnotherapist. He was one of the 2 investigators on the entity case, the famous entity case. Kerry came up for this from LA. And I had another colleague, somebody working with me on the team, Barbara Gallagher, was also with us as well. And we were there most of the day. At one point, before dinner, we were kind of camped out in the restaurant area. We had done some interviews, and the cameraman locked down the camera. We're going to do some interviews at a table, at one of the dining tables. And it's a glass top. It's got some placemats on it, 4 placemats, 4 place settings. The doors were not open. There was no breeze happening at that time. And they just locked down the camera once they decided where people are going to be sitting. And it was just rolling because we're just about to start having people sit down and do the interviews. And what happened, as we noticed, one of the placemats flipped up and then floated back down. The camera caught that. It's also in the playback, and looking back at that footage, so we looked at it right away. There was some kind of bizarre, and this has happened to me on other shoots as well. There was some very unusual static on the video that coincided with the movement of the placemat that did not occur any other time on any of the other footage. And when they were in edit, they called me from the edit room and told me that is the only place that they got this unusual static on there. So something was going on. This has happened in other TV shoots that I've done as well, for places that seemingly had apparitions, where there's some sort of electronic interference that happens.
Okay. Now, a lot of the incidents you've been describing to us have been from the 1990s and so forth. Have you had ongoing involvement with the Banta Inn?
I have not. It's been 25 years. I mean, I've been there a few times. I do know from Joan, after she sold the place, she told me that the guy who came in, who was the bartender and manager, she said his personality and demeanor was a lot like Tony's. And at that point, people were almost not reporting anything at all. It's almost as if Tony, my gut feeling is that Tony felt, okay, the place is in good hands now. Not that Joan was not good hands. It's just there wasn't somebody like him. He sold that guy left in the early 2000s. And I was there a few years ago, and I did hear that there was still stuff going on, but I didn't hear any sightings of Tony at this point. So I don't know really if he's still there or if Margaret's still there. We just haven't gone back in. So I have to reconnect with the current owner and see what we can do.
Okay, so if people want to visit the Banta Inn, they may not have a ghostly experience, but in that case, the important question would be, how's the food?
Yes. So at least the food, every time I've been there, and again, I was there a few years ago, has always been very good and really, really reasonably priced. It is a very rustic place. Was one of my favorite places. I mean, it's an hour away for me to drive there, and a little over an hour. And I never once felt like I didn't want to go because it was so far away, ghost or no ghost, because the food was always great at the Banta Inn. I will say, though, that any haunted restaurant, even ones that are even at the height of Tony's activity, he might not have experienced anything. It's not like he was doing things all day. There were times that, even though I mentioned the physicist Tom said we would come for the show, there wouldn't always be a show. So ghosts are people too. They're just dead. So you can't expect them to perform like some of the guys on TV want you to.
Now, this particular case is written up in one of your books called A Paranormal Casebook.
Correct.
And we'll have a link to that so people can get their own copy. What will they be getting if they order a copy? What else will they be able to read, just in general terms?
Well, besides the write-up of the Banta Inn case, there is a lengthy write-up of the USS Hornet, early investigations. I did the initial investigations there for a few years. A lot of the people, I see other people writing up the case and never mentioning any of the early stuff at all.
And we covered that in a 2-part episode a while back. Yeah.
And then there's probably the longest write-up of the Moss Beach Distillery case, going through 1991 to 2005. And then another book of mine which is called The Ghost Detective's Guide to Haunted San Francisco, which I co-authored with Annette Martin, a psychic. Kind of gives it a little bit extra, but I did add a little bit more back into the second edition of A Paranormal Casebook. There are also other cases of mine that happen in residences. So, not places you can visit, but certainly public, not publicly discussed in some ways with confidential details hidden. There are also a few cases in there that are not paranormal and have their own unusual explanations. So worthwhile reading. In fact, I occasionally hear from people that they were the more interesting cases in the book. Typically from Skeptics.
And we covered one of those previously on Mysterious World in our episode on the Hell House of Martinez.
Right. That was one of my most interesting cases, I have to say. Even though I love the ghost cases, that turned out to be one of the more interesting cases for a lot of reasons.
What are some other books that you have that people might be interested in checking out?
Well, one book that I have that's about investigations is called ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, a Parapsychologist's Handbook, which I am now in the process of slightly updating and getting out, hopefully no later than the end of February, if not sooner than that, in a 40th anniversary edition. It came out in 86. So I'm going to be adding some material to that I have never added before, that it doesn't appear elsewhere for the most part. And so that one is available in Kindle and as an ebook, as a paperback book as well, and as an audiobook. Paranormal Casebook is also available as an audiobook. And then also there's another book I have called Psychic Dreaming, which is about that topic, but also about dreams in general. And for those who are interested more in the psychic stuff, especially the remote viewing area of our topic, ESP Wars East and West is a history of the U.S. government's involvement in the remote viewing program from the early 70s straight through past the 1995 closure of the Stargate program. The main author of that was the program director from 1985 through 1995. Joe McMoneagle, the #1 viewer, is a contributor to the book. And Victor Rubel brought in the Russians. So it's the only book on government psychic spying that provides the Russian side of the story from the mouths of the Russians. None of the others do that. It's a really fascinating book, and it's whether you're interested in psychic stuff or political stuff, because if you're interested in political stuff, there's a lot of good stories about the KGB in there. So,
okay. Now, we mentioned at the beginning of the interview that you also teach courses for the Rhine Education Center.
I do.
And this episode is going to be airing in February, so that's during a semester. But what kinds of courses do you teach for them, and how can people learn more about them?
So the website for the Rhine Education Center is www.rhineedu.org, and Rhine is R-H-I-N-E, like the river. So rhineedu.org. I teach a variety of courses. So, for example, the courses that will have started at the beginning of February include a basic field investigations class for those who want to learn the process of parapsychological field investigations, not what you see on TV. I'll be teaching a course on dreams and altered states of consciousness, and teaching a short course, which may not have started. We haven't set the dates yet by the time this airs, so it may be starting after that, on looking at the technology, the equipment that ghost hunters love to use, and the proper way to use things and what doesn't work at all, no matter what they say on TV. But I also teach courses. So in the spring, I'll be teaching a course on evidence for survival of bodily death, as well as a course, most likely I'll be teaching a course on cross-cultural stuff. So looking at beliefs and reported experiences of people psychically around the world in other cultures. So kind of an anthropology, parapsychology course. I occasionally teach a course on how to choose a psychic and assess a psychic reading. Are they any good or not? I teach courses on developing your intuition, developing your ESP, and a variety of other assorted subjects. But we also have research courses. So if folks are interested in the actual research end of things, controlled research, John Kruth usually teaches most of those. And some guy named Jimmy Akin's teaching the Intro to Parapsychology course from time to time. So,
as well as a few others, mostly focusing on religion and parapsychology.
Right.
Okay. And in addition to the books and the courses you teach, you also have some YouTube presence.
Yes,
what should people look there?
Yeah. So two things. Number one is my website, where you can find out about all this stuff, which is www.lloydauerbach.com. And Lloyd is spelled with one L. That's kind of important, too. And then I have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@AskProfessorParanormal. I do an every other week live Q&A on YouTube. It's usually on Sunday evenings. And at 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern, you can find the upcoming dates on the channel itself. There's a description of at least the next upcoming date that you can kind of figure out 2 weeks later after that. The other shows, the past shows, have all been recorded there under the live tab. And people come and they just ask all sorts of questions, about the psychic world. In January, and the recording will be up, of course, because this is going to be airing in February. I'll be interviewing, having somebody as a guest. I've never done a guest on my show, but I'm going to have Steve Gonzalez, who was one of the folks who's appeared on the TV show Ghost Hunters. But I've had interactions with him over the years. Well, I usually would never talk to most of those guys. Steve and I have talked quite a bit over the years, and he actually has knowledge of parapsychology and is interested in the subject, unlike most of the other folks who are on that show, who've been involved in that show. And he's got some interesting experiences we're going to talk about for that.
Okay.
And if people want to see some video on the Banta Inn of some of these TV segments, including the Hearts of Copy segment, is on another YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/Lloyd Auerbach.
Okay. And we'll have links to all of those for folks. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
I think that's about it. Just keep an eye out for the new edition of ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, which should be, by the time this airs, I'm hoping that it's already available. So,
okay, well, we'll definitely have a link to it. And Lloyd Auerbach, thank you so much for coming on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Thank you, Jimmy. Always a pleasure.
Jimmy, let's look briefly at the Banta Inn from both the faith and reason perspectives. What would the faith have to say about it?
Well, nothing about the Banta Inn itself in particular, but many faiths, including the Christian faith, acknowledge the existence of the afterlife and thus the existence of human spirits. In particular, the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith acknowledges that the souls of the departed can sometimes manifest to the living, both in the form of the apparitions of the saints in heaven and in the form of apparitions of souls that are still on their way to heaven. In fact, that has been the traditional Catholic understanding of what ghosts are, and Christian history is filled with reports of that phenomenon. I decided recently to do an episode just on historical accounts, so that's something we'll be looking at in the future.
Some people wonder, whenever anything ghostly happens, whether it might be a demon, because it's always demons. So do you detect any evidence of that in this case?
No, I don't see any evidence of that here. Demons like to hurt people, but nobody got hurt in this case. So to the contrary, there was evidence of the ghost protecting people. Demons like to get people to believe things that are theologically false, but we have no reports of that happening here. Demons like to be worshipped as deities, but that didn't happen here. Demons like to possess people, and that definitely didn't happen here. So I don't see any evidence of this being demonic activity. Under the principle of phenomenal conservatism, this should be interpreted as how it presented itself, the apparition of a ghost.
And so what can we say about the Banta Inn from the reason perspective? How credible is this case?
This is a very credible case. We have a large number of reports from a large number of witnesses. Anytime you have multiple witnesses perceiving something, it needs to be taken more seriously, and here we have a bunch of witnesses. We also have witnesses with vertical information, that is, things they had no way of knowing naturally, but that turned out to be true, including people who had never seen Tony, seeing him playing cards or in a mirror, and then being able to pick him out of a photo lineup, as well as seeing him playing two-handed poker, even though they'd never seen him doing that when he was alive, because they'd never seen him when he was alive at all. And we have some phenomena being caught on camera. So in total, I think this is a very strong case.
And so what's your bottom line here?
The Banta Inn is a historic building that has had a colorful history, and we have very good evidence that the ghosts of Tony Gukin, as well as regular patron Margaret, were perceived by multiple witnesses there, with multiple lines of converging evidence. Of course, no evidence is undeniable, but I do think that this is a very strong case for ghostly apparitions.
And so what further resources can we offer to folks on this one?
We'll have a link to Lloyd Auerbach's book, A Paranormal Casebook, as well as a link to his other books in general, also the Rhine Education Center, Lloyd's website, lloydauerbach.com, Lloyd's Ask Professor Paranormal channel on YouTube, as well as his regular YouTube channel, also the songs Walking After Midnight and Spirits in the Material World.
Now we turn to our mysterious feedback brought to us by our feedback coordinator, Rob Leonardi, and this feedback is from our episode 393, The Sword of St. Michael and More Weird Questions. The first feedback comes from Jake Busher, who sent in this email. One of the very few places that I depart from St. Thomas is on lying. Glad that you answered that question in your recent episode. Although it seems like an unimportant intramural dispute, it actually can look fundamentally discrediting to our faith from the outside if we fly in the face of common sense here. Although the harm argument will work on many people, plenty more will simply point out that your offensive is not against the person, it's against truth. Since God is the maximum and thus cause of all truth, it is therefore an offense against God. You conceded it would always be wrong to deny your faith, but the argument would be that you're also turning against God and becoming a witness against truth itself in any act of lying. I'd love to see you do a debate on this topic. Thank you for taking a reasonable position on this.
Well, thank you, Jake. So you've sketched out an argument that someone who takes St. Thomas's position that lying is always wrong, so you could not, for example, lie in order to save, the lives of Jewish people from Nazis. You've sketched an argument in favor of St. Thomas's position, and I haven't heard the argument put exactly that way before. But what I would say, and I have actually debated this, there's a link on my YouTube channel. But I would say that the argument that God is truth, and so any lying is a direct offense against God, is problematic because God is also love, And love is inconsistent with pain and killing. Therefore, it's a direct against God if you deliberately inflict pain or kill someone. But we know that's possible because in cases of legitimate self-defense, you can cause an attacker pain to get them to leave you or other people alone, or if all else fails, you can kill them in order to save human life. And we wouldn't say those are direct offenses against God. We would say they're tragedies that God does not want to have to happen. But if someone misuses their free will, you can use pain or even lethal force in order to save human life. And in the same way, anytime you have to use deception or tell a lie, it's a tragedy, and God doesn't want that situation to arise. But if someone, let's say a Nazi, uses their free will in such a way that you would have to deceive them in order to save human life, it's legitimate to do that.
Our next feedback comes from Nathan Holinda, who sent in this email. I just finished listening to your podcast titled The Sword of St. Michael, and you answered, "We just don't know," regarding a question if angels can administer the sacraments. So I was wondering what your thoughts on St. Faustina's diary are when she wrote, quote, "Once when a certain doubt rose within me shortly before the Holy Communion, I said to the seraph, 'Could you perhaps hear my confession?' And he answered me, 'No spirit in heaven has that power,'" end quote. The seraph goes on to say something like, "Only the priests hold the power to forgive sins." Sorry, I couldn't find the exact wording as I did a quick Google search. Thanks for your answer.
Well, I would say that experience leaves me in fundamentally the same position I articulated. We don't know what sacraments, if any, angels could perform. In fact, there are Jewish sources from the Second Temple era that depict angels, or at least some angels, as heavenly priests. And that's also found in the Christian scriptures. So you could say, well, they are priests, and so they could do all of the sacraments. On the other hand, we don't know they're priests in the same way humans are priests, and so we can't say that they can do that. When it comes to evidence from St. Faustina's diary, well, it's private revelation, and even in approved private revelation that has been verified as of supernatural origin, which hers is not, because just because someone is a saint doesn't mean they've established any reported revelations of this person as genuinely supernatural. Even if you assume hers is supernatural, it's not inspired scripture. As the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith has pointed out, there are elements of human consciousness and the seer's background mixed in with whatever signal they're receiving from a supernatural source. And so I could say, well, St. Faustina presumably perceived the angel as saying that, but the DDF has pointed out we shouldn't rely on that as if it's scripture. It can and will contain elements that reflect the seer's background and understanding, and so I would say it's not decisive. I can't treat it like, gospel. And so I would say, well, it's an interesting piece of data, but it doesn't settle the question for me. And so I'm still back in my original position of we just don't know for sure.
And then Nicholas Jagno, depending how you pronounce it, writes on YouTube, "Wearing head covering in church is a fashion statement? No, Jimmy. I can tell you that the reason the women in my life wear a veil at Mass is that it is a sign of humility and reverence."
So I don't remember the exact context. I can imagine saying, in a sense, this is a fashion statement, but the question would then be, what is that statement? And I would say it's a statement of this is how I express my humility and reverence. So I don't think that the two are in opposition to each other. You can be making a statement by, I do this pious practice in order to demonstrate my humility and reverence and communicate that to people around me and to God, who I'm really there to talk to in a church service. So I wouldn't view the statement that something is a fashion statement as meaning it is merely a fashion statement. What I imagine I might have used that phrase to convey is it's not a matter of divine law that you have to do this.
Right. And now it's time to hear from you. What are your theories about the Banta Inn and the ghosts appearing there? You can let us know by visiting sqpn.com or the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page, sending us an email to feedback@mysterious.fm, sending a tweet to @mys_world, visiting the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or by calling our mysterious feedback line at 619-738-4515. That's 619-738-4515.
And I want to say a special word of thanks to Oasis Studio 7 for the video and animation work in this episode. Check it out by going to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. And we're trying to make it to 200,000 subscribers now, but you can help us out by liking, commenting, writing reviews, sharing videos, and especially, since we're trying to gain subscribers, by subscribing. And be sure and hit the bell notification when you do that so you always get notified when I have a new video, because there's new ones coming out multiple times a week.
So, Jimmy, what's our next episode going to be about?
Well, next week we're staying in California, and we're even staying in the Bay Area. We're going to be going back to 1969, the year after Tony Gukin died, and we're going to be talking about the Zodiac killer that terrified people in the Bay Area back in 1969 and subsequent years. And we're going to be looking at a very unusual proposal about the Zodiac killer, that he didn't exist and was just a hoax.
Very interesting. Folks, be sure to share the podcast with your friends and write a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from to help us grow this community and reach even more listeners. And get your very own Mysterious World t-shirt, mug, and more in our merchandise shop at sqpn.com/merch. You'll find links to Jimmy's resources from our discussion on our show notes at mysterious.fm/404. And remember, to help us continue to produce the podcast, please visit givemysterious.fm. Hey folks, every week Jimmy and I explore the fascinating mysteries of the universe, from the supernatural to the natural, using our faith and reason. And we're grateful for the amazing community that's grown around the show and for the support we receive from patrons and sponsors. Right now, we have sponsorship spots available for the coming months. If you have a business, ministry, event, or service that you'd like to put in front of a thoughtful, engaged audience, sponsoring Mysterious World is a great way to do it. You'll not only reach tens of thousands of loyal listeners who trust and value quality content, you'll also be supporting the mission of StarQuest, helping us keep producing the shows you love. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities and how we can help share your message, visit sqpn.com/sponsor or drop me an email at domenico@sqpn.com. Thanks and God bless. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on StarQuest.